Welcome to Veterans Archives, where we are dedicated to preserving the stories of our nation's heroes. We hope you enjoy this story. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, like and share our videos. Check us out across all social media. Be sure to like and share those pages as well. And for more information, go to www.veteransarchives.org. Today is Thursday, June 26th, 2025. We're here with Steve Conaway, who served in the United States Air Force. So good afternoon, Steve.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for taking time out of your day to sit and talk with us.
Well, thank you for doing this.
Absolutely, my privilege to be here. So we'll start out real simple. When and where were you born?
I was born on February 19th, 1949 in Chicago, Illinois.
Okay, so did you grow up in Chicago?
No, my parents left when I was 6 months old, so I have no knowledge of Chicago to speak of.
No recollection of being in Chicago?
No, none at all.
Well, where did they go from Chicago?
From Chicago, my dad was in advertising, and he went to Topeka, Kansas.
Okay. What kind of advertising did he do?
Mostly, it was called Capper's Farmers, which I believe was a magazine.
Okay. All right. And how long were you in Topeka?
Till the fourth grade.
All right. Do you have any memories of being in Topeka?
Oh, absolutely. I can remember we lived fairly close to a creek, and we were always down looking for frogs and climbing trees, which I fell out of one, but yeah, I have some memories.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you don't climb trees and not fall out once in a while,
No.
right?
Yeah.
So what are some of your fondest memories then of being in Kansas before you moved?
Well, just as a young boy, having a lot of fun, a lot of friends, because there was no cell phones or internet or anything like that. We were constantly outside playing, and it's a lot different world today, but my recollection was that it was a great childhood.
Yeah. So at the ripe old age of 4, before you even started school, then you moved, and where did you move from there?
To New York.
Okay.
And again, my dad was in advertising, and being the advertising capital of the world, we moved there, and he worked for multiple magazines, Woman's Day, Field and Stream. He actually did a story in Field and Stream on big family camping. And that's pretty much where I was up until I went into the service.
All right. Now, were you in New York, or you upstate New York?
Huntington, Long Island.
Oh.
So about 45 minutes outside of the city.
Okay, but still kind of city living?
Yeah.
All right. And how was that different from Kansas?
About the only thing different was there wasn't a lot of woods, but we had the Huntington Bay and the harbor and Long Island Sound, and so there was more of a watery type environment.
Mm-hmm. And you make a lot of friends there?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And so did you have brothers and sisters?
I had 3 sisters and 2 brothers.
That's a big family.
Yes.
Where'd you fall in the pecking order?
I was number 2.
Okay. All right. So you never really got to be the baby, and you were never really the middle kid.
Well, there's some disadvantages and advantages to that. My oldest sister, I think she had to be home by 9 on Friday and Saturday. I was 9:30. By the time it came to the 6th child, they didn't care if she came home at all.
Right. A lot of people I talk to say that in a big family, you've got all the baby books. In the first kid, their baby book's a volume and a half, and yeah, by the time they get to that last kid, there's maybe 3 pictures in 1 sentence, right?
Yeah.
Is that kind of how it worked?
Yes.
Now, were you pretty good friends with your siblings? Did you hang out with your brothers and sisters at all?
Probably to the dismay of my older sister, because she was closest to what I did. So I'd hang around, and at that time, we lived near a potato field, and her friends, which were a lot of boys and girls, they would go out there, and I would try and hang around with her, and I'm not too sure she was always that happy about it.
Yeah, I can imagine. No one wants their younger brother hanging out, right?
Right.
I see. So how was school for you?
I was a fair student, didn't have a lot of interest.
Mm-hmm.
I actually made a deal with my English teacher in my senior year that as long as I did my assignments and didn't cause any trouble, he'd make sure I got a passing grade to graduate.
Okay, so you agreed not to make trouble. Was there something in the past there with him that made him think that maybe you would cause some trouble?
No, not really. I mean, I didn't cause a lot of trouble, and I don't think I ever had my parents were never called to come to school or anything like that. But English was not my forte. I could have cared less about a noun and a verb, and so yeah, I just wanted to make sure I got through that course.
Yeah. Did you have any courses that you really liked in school?
Well, yeah, wood shop, metal shop. I played football in high school. I don't think I ever got but one game, but I was on the team. And around the age, I'm going to say, of 15, I got a job in a local bowling alley, and then eventually got interested in girls and all the things that a teenage boy does, and that kind of I lost interest in doing much else. And cars, obviously.
Yes, yes. It's funny, like kids today aren't into cars like we were.
Oh no, I mean I rebuilt an engine on a car, and to this day I do my own oil changes, I do my own brake jobs. I've got I walk into Sears and the guy asks me if he can help me in the tool department. I said, no, I'm pretty sure I have every tool you have in here, but I'm just looking around in case I don't.
Maybe you could help him, right?
Right.
Well, that's the other thing too. Like you walk into an auto parts store today, and there's not a lot of car guys behind the counter either.
Right.
I find.
Right.
I wanna buy a spring for something, and they want to know what size motor I have and whether it has air conditioning.
Yeah, they have to look it all up on the computer.
Yeah. I remember I had a car, and I was going to put an aftermarket carburetor on. I was going to buy a Holley carburetor for it, and I had to go round and round with the guy behind the counter. I'm like, I know what I need. Just sell me the carburetor. You don't need you don't need all that other stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Today they don't even know what a carburetor is. No less a 4-barrel.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Or a 6-pack, or any of the other great things that we got to see, right?
Yeah.
So you make it through school. I wanted to ask though, what drew you to play football for that season?
Well, I'd always, since I was very young, we'd go out up to the field with 4 or 5 kids and play football. I bought a helmet, and I was always very interested in football. In junior high school, the guidance counselor would call me in, and he would ask me what I wanted to do when I grew up, and I used to tell him my dad was in the Navy, so I'd say, well, I either want to join the Navy or I want to play football. And they'd look at me like, wow, that's some wild choices. Well, today football players make millions of dollars, maybe not so much in that day, but when it was kind of thought as being kind of strange at that time, it's not so strange anymore.
Right. I never thought about it that way, though. There's so many things that have changed over the years. I mean, sports figures back in the day were popular and people liked them, but they weren't making the kind of money they make now.
Well, being a New Yorker too, Mickey Mantle, Roger Maris.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, were you there when the Brooklyn Dodgers? When did they leave New York?
I don't think I ever went to see a Dodgers game. We'd go into Yankee Stadium occasionally and see the Yankees play. And never was in. I don't think I was ever in Met Stadium.
Oh, okay.
Because I left New York when I was 19, so I'm not too sure that. I think the stadium might have been brand new. I'm not even sure.
Yeah. Big baseball town, though.
Yes.
Definitely. My brother-in-law is a huge Yankees fan. Yeah. He lives in Arizona, so I don't understand it, but he's a huge Yankees fan.
I've got a brother who's lives in St. Louis, and he's tortured by the Cardinals and the Yankees when they play.
Oh, poor guy. So you make it through school. Did you go right into the service at that point, or did you go to college? What happened after school?
I didn't have much interest in going to college, and so I wanted to join the service to get an education. That's one of the reasons I picked the Air Force. And believe it or not, during that time with the draft, there was a year waiting list to get into the Air Force. And I ended up taking my draft physical the day before I was inducted into the Air Force. And I asked my recruiter, why should I bother to go into the city and take the draft physical? And he says, because for some reason you're not inducted, and then you've got a problem. So I spent my last day as a civilian taking a draft physical.
Oh, great. The military physicals aren't the best either.
No.
Not at all. So you end up enlisting in the Air Force then?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And what was your job? What was your rating?
I had believe it or not, what I did when I took the Air Force test, and there's 4 different areas. One of them was mechanical, and I was very mechanical. I was what was called a pin chaser. I worked on automatic bowling machines and stuff like that, worked on cars. Had torn engines apart when I was a kid, lawnmower engines, and put them back together. But I answered all those questions wrong. Like, I had no idea what I was doing with mechanics, because I didn't want to be in the motor pool. That wasn't the education I was trying to get. I had very high scores in administrative and general, and I can't remember the other category. But what I was trying to do was get into computers, which in 1968 were in their infancy.
Right.
And so my recruiter signed me up to get into computers. Little did I know, when I got down to basic training, my score wasn't high enough to be in computers, so he kind of buffaloed me.
Nice. You buffaloed the test, and your recruiter buffaloed you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So before we get too far into it, I really want to know what was that experience like for you, getting to basic training, and what was it like when you arrived, and what were your thoughts?
Well, it was in May, very hot, humid day, especially down in Texas. By the time we got in, and by the way, this was my first airplane flight ever.
Really?
Yes.
Did you wear a suit?
No. I don't remember. No.
Okay. The reason I ask is I've talked to a couple of guys, and their first airplane ride ever was to go to basic training, and their parents, their moms, made them wear suits because that's what you did when you flew back in the the day.
No, I don't recall ever wearing a suit.
I'm just curious.
So anyway, to this day, on a dark, muggy day, it reminds me of flying into Texas. It was probably 4 o'clock in the morning. You're tired and you're thinking, oh boy, we're gonna, be able to finally get some rest. And that doesn't happen. You're not going to bed, boy. They're running you around, and it's a real eye opener.
Yeah. Were you kind of double guessing your own judgment when you got off that plane?
Oh, not at all. I definitely wanted to serve. My mom wanted me to serve in the Air Force because she said she felt that I'd have less of a chance of going to Vietnam, which was not an issue for me.
Right.
I wanted to go, to be quite honest. And within, I'm going to say a year and a couple of months, I had orders to Vietnam.
Wow.
So, but that's not at all why I joined the Air Force.
Right. So you get to basic training. It's hot, it's muggy, and that's probably how it is the whole time you're there.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about you get there, and they're like, "Oh, you're not going into computers." What ended up happening with that portion of it?
Well, at that point, you select, I'm believing, several different areas that you could work in, and one of them that I selected was air traffic control. And I had no idea what it was. I thought actually it was the guys with the wands that park airplanes. No concept whatsoever of it.
Right.
And I ended up getting that. And when I got out of basic, I was sent down to Biloxi, Mississippi for the air traffic control school.
Okay. And that's interesting though with the military is like the names don't necessarily match like what the job is.
Right.
I was in the Navy and I was a fire controlman, and for years my mom thought I was a firefighter. And I had to explain to her, no, Mom, I start fires on other people's ships.
Right. Well, when I got the orders, it was actually called an air traffic control. No, I'm sorry, an aerospace control systems operator.
Wow.
Was what they called it. Whereas today, if you were to say air traffic control or air traffic controller, everybody would know what you were talking about.
Right. Almost like it was written by an attorney or something.
Yeah.
So how was your schooling then for that?
Great. I was an honor graduate out of school. It was a 16-week course in Biloxi, Mississippi at Keesler Air Force Base. So I had about a 4-week time period where before I was actually going to get into this school. So they had you out sweeping the streets and doing all kinds of crazy stuff just to keep you occupied.
Now, was your schooling, was it kind of almost like an extension of basic training where they kind of still treated you like a basic trainee?
Not quite as bad, but pretty close. You still marched and they still had a lot of control over you versus 2 or 3 years later when you were now on your own and doing your job
Right. Treated like an adult finally.
Right.
Yeah. So you go to that school. At some point, did you come home for leave?
No, my brother had a friend that was coming down, my younger brother, and so he came down to visit me. But other than that, there was no leave. When I left school, I was able to go back to New York. My base was going to be in New Hampshire, so I was able to get home for a few days, get my car, and then drove up to New Hampshire.
Okay. And then how long were you stationed in New Hampshire?
About a year.
And you were just doing regular air traffic control duties
Well,
then? What was that like?
Yeah, it's a constant job with constant training. Every time you go to a new location, you don't just instantly sit down and start controlling air traffic. You have to learn the area. You have to learn all the approaches. Mm-hmm. More often than not, you're also controlling into satellite airports and stuff like that. So it's not uncommon. I would say I probably was a journeyman controller during that time of maybe 2 months, where I could actually work the position by myself.
Okay. So that's pretty standard. Then you go there, you have to learn, and then so not bad if you're into continuous learning.
Right.
Yeah. And what was it like there? Was it fairly busy?
I wouldn't necessarily say so. It was a SAC base, which meant that we had B-52s and KC-135s. No civilian traffic. Civilian traffic on the SAC base are not allowed to land even with an emergency because of the security involved with the B-52s. And then they had what they called EWO launches, where EWO means imminent war. They go out, they get in those B-52s, they don't talk to air traffic control, they go out on the runway and they take off. They don't care if they've got your permission or anything.
Because something's got to happen like right now.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so you did that for a while, and so that kind of lines up. Is this when you got your orders to go to Vietnam then?
Yes.
All right.
So in September of 1969, I had my orders. They were actually called re-levied orders, which means that somebody had gotten their wife pregnant, so they weren't going. So guess what? You get to go.
Nice.
Which wasn't a problem for me. I really had no problem at all going to Vietnam.
Yeah.
Probably where it was a little bit strange is that I had my orders said that I was supposed to go to survival school and combat training. Excuse me. And they waived all that and just sent me. But that was the attitude of the government at the time. You know, if you get killed, they'll just send somebody else's son over there.
Yeah. Yeah, they just needed breathing bodies, right?
Yeah.
Butts and seats.
And what was really strange was when I got my orders, they would either tell me the name of the base or they would tell me the field post office box number, but not both. So I gave me the name. And I was going up to a Marine encampment up by the DMZ called Quang Tri. And I don't even know if they had a control tower there. And I kept saying, you know, I was in the Air Force, don't you? So with not having, you know, any real training other than the air traffic control training, it seemed a little strange.
Yeah.
But once I got to Da Nang, which was the main squadron, and then you were sent up to Quang Tri, there was quite a few controllers that were there, and they closed it down to air traffic controllers, so we were sent to other places in the country.
Okay. Now, I'm just curious. So, is Da Nang that's where, like, everybody gathered, and then was that like the marshalling area for all the people coming in country?
Not necessarily.
It seems like a lot of people went there.
Yeah, not necessarily. The Air Force Communications Squadron, which is relatively small, in every location that I'd ever been at. So that was their main location, which was the 1972nd Com Squadron, and then from there, you would go out to some of the closer bases. So, and then when I was in the 18th, 84th Com Squadron when I went TDY.
Okay. All right. I want to ask before I forget. Were you married at this time? Were you dating someone? What was going on, like, in your personal life?
No, I got a dear John within about 2 weeks of in basic training, and I had no plans on getting married while I was in the service.
Yeah. I don't blame you.
Yeah.
So you get to Vietnam, you get to your duty station. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, originally, we sat in the barracks for, interesting story is when we got to the barracks, they had two sections. They had the air traffic control section with the controllers, And then they had people like me who weren't going to stay at Da Nang. And we were up in a 2-story barracks. And so I was up in the top of the 2-story at the end where the perimeter was. And you could see holes in the wall from the shrapnel, and the locker was mangled. So this is where the new guys get to stay.
If you survive that, you get to move on to someplace else, right?
So I think I was there for 2, maybe 3 weeks before I got temporary duty orders to an air base called Tuiwa, which most people would tell you they've never heard of. It was on the South China Sea. I'm going to say maybe 100, maybe a little bit more miles north of Cam Ranh Bay. And it was typically an Air Force F-100 wing squadron was there. That was the primary aircraft.
So how was it different being air traffic control for the SAC base, where you have the large aircraft, and now you're at another? It sounds like a completely different way of doing air traffic control.
Yeah, it's a little faster, obviously. You're dealing with small jets versus the lumbering KC-135s and B-52s. Probably the most interesting part of it is we had mountains on one end of the runway, so we couldn't bring any traffic straight into to the runway, which were parallel. There were only 2 runways; they were parallel. So we had to run what was called opposite direction traffic. We had arrivals coming in while departures were taking off. So the requirement was for the F-100 that was taking off within a mile of the end of the runway, they had to turn out. And sometimes they got pretty darn close to each other because they were in the clouds. And I never had one say he saw one.
Wow.
But we had what was called precision approach radar, where you could see their azimuth and elevation as one was going out and one was coming in. And in Vietnam, air traffic control, they had what was called tactical, which meant that the pilots could follow your instructions, or they didn't have to. So if they were on an outbound for a bomb run, and you had to hold them down for other traffic, and they didn't want to, they did what they wanted to do. It wasn't positive control like it is here in this country.
Wow, that's got to make your job a little difficult sometimes.
Well, it tends to make you a little nervous, hopefully.
Yeah.
And then there were always a lot of emergencies. Another problem we had, I worked in a radar unit. I was a radar approach controller versus a control tower controller.
Okay.
So our radar unit was between the 2 runways. And what would happen when an F-100 came in with hung ordnance, they would come in and they would do a touch and go to see if the ordnance was going to fall off the airplane or not before they came in and actually did a landing. So what would happen is when they were doing that, the tower had a buzzer with we called it a bailout alarm, where we were supposed to bail out of the radar unit. But you didn't know which way to go. There were 4 ways to go, and you were just hoping you were running the wrong way.
Right.
The right way, I'm sorry. Yeah.
You had a 75% chance of
we
going
never
the
had
correct
one
way.
actually drop napalm or anything on the runway, but it's never a comforting feeling knowing that could happen.
Right.
And then we were also very close to the perimeter, so prior to me getting to Tuiwa, they had a sapper team that came in and blew some F-100s up in the revetments and all that. So we had F-16s in the unit, and our responsibility would have been if there were a breach of the perimeter, then we were to guard the radar unit.
Okay. It sounds like a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah.
While you're there. I wanted to ask you too, so this is kind of backing up just a little bit, but you were in Texas and then you were in Biloxi, and I've been in Biloxi in the summertime, and it's not even half as much fun as Texas, right? So when you got to Vietnam, were you pretty well acclimated for that heat, or was it just a whole different thing when you got there?
I don't remember real issues with it. One of the things is the radar unit, which is like almost like a mobile trailer, had air conditioning.
Oh.
So at least 8 hours a day you were sitting in air conditioning because the equipment needed it. That wasn't the case once you left the job. But my recall was it was more of the monsoons, where when it just rained and rained and rained, you could have your poncho on, and it didn't make any difference. That water came off the poncho, hit your pants, and then soaked all the way up. So it was like you didn't have a poncho on at all.
Yeah.
When you took the poncho off, you were just soaked to the brim.
Yeah, and that lasted for quite a while too, right? That's
Yeah,
like a
I'm
whole
pretty
season.
sure monsoons last around 6 months.
Yeah. So you're just wet and miserable for for 6 months.
Right. And then we had the lizards and all kinds of stuff. We were kind of a very sandy area.
Uh-huh.
And so yeah, it was interesting. And I when I was a kid in Kansas, I'd go to YMCA school and we'd get horned toads and lizards and all that stuff, and so it didn't bother me any. Some people didn't particularly care to have lizards in their hooch.
Right. They were just sharing space with you, right?
Right. Yeah.
Now, how long were you in Vietnam then?
1 year.
Just a 1-year tour.
Yeah.
Okay. And the other question I had for you is, did you find that your mechanical abilities were helpful when you got there? I mean, I know that you're air traffic control, but my experience in the military has always been like people have these other skills and they really come in handy if something breaks or something happens. Did you find that at all?
No, not really, because we had maintenance technicians to handle all that kind of stuff. I mean, we did have all kinds of knobs and all this kind of good stuff. We plotted the artillery so that we made sure we weren't bringing the aircraft in known artillery places and stuff like that. But as far as any maintenance, we had maintenance technicians for that.
So you absolutely got what you wanted then. You were nowhere near turning wrenches.
Right.
Right. And do you feel like the education you got in air traffic control, although, I mean, rudimentary compared to today, do you think that helped you gain computer skills, that kind of thing?
I do. Just simply, I mean, we haven't gotten there yet, but I went into the FAA where it became very much more computerized, where when an aircraft would call you, you would punch in the number and all that, give them a squawk code, and it would instantly tag that target, indicating that was the aircraft, which is far different than when in Vietnam. And then after Vietnam, I came back to Selfridge, which is a whole nother story.
Yeah.
But we were still having to turn aircraft for identification. So if an aircraft came in, said I'm 20 miles northeast of the airport, the first thing you did is look for a raw radar target. If you saw one, you'd ask him his heading, and then you would turn him 30 degrees and see if that target made that move to get positive identification, because you never wanted to misidentify an aircraft.
Right. Right. Yeah, that would be. So when you're looking at them on radar, then so there's no identification number or anything on that.
Not at that
on
time.
that blip. So you just got to know that blip belongs to that one and that blip belongs to that
Right.
one.
Yeah.
Wow, that's that's challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you think back to your time in Vietnam, is there anything that really sticks out? Is there anything else you kind of want to talk about your time in country?
No, the only thing I can remember is that I had considered going for another year there, and my problem was that I was going to have about 4 months left in my enlistment, and I didn't have any control tower experience, and I wanted to get some, so I was afraid that they would let me have an early out, and I didn't want that, so that's why I didn't extend, and so when I eventually, Selfridge was the next base I got to. Here in Michigan, I was able to get about 6 months of control tower experience.
All right. Well, let's talk about your return then from Vietnam. Did you take some time off and go home for a while, or what? I mean, what did you do when you left country?
Yeah, I did. I actually got home maybe 3 or 4 days before. Anybody in my family knew it, and I didn't tell them. I thought I would surprise them. Well, when I left New York, the doors used to be wide open. Nobody locked it or anything like that. So I get to the house and nobody's there. My mom's teaching and all the siblings are either gone or in school or whatever. My dad's in New York City working. And I tried to get in the house and I couldn't get in the house because they were now locking everything up. So I forget how, but somehow my mom got word and rushed home. But the other thing I remember was that they had a microwave, and I had no idea what a microwave was. And so I'm looking around, and they had some crab cakes in the freezer. So I took a crab cake out, and I put it on for 5 minutes in the microwave. And when it came out, you could have taken it out and put it in the rock garden.
There's some nuance to cooking with a microwave, right?
Yeah. And 5 minutes with a crab cake is not.
No, not a frozen crab cake.
Right.
Good thing it wasn't wrapped in foil. You'd have gotten a whole different experience.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so things changed a lot in the time that you were gone.
Yes. And my mom was, I wasn't a big writer, and so occasionally I would get care packages, and my mom would have liked if I'd have written a little more, but she was a warrior to start with. And, you know, what was I going to write about? Well, we were on DEFCON 5 today, and you know, we're expecting an attack tonight. That wasn't going to make her calm her nerves at all.
No.
And again, I wasn't a big writer to start with.
Yeah, you know what I told my family was, I'm not going to tell you how bad it is here as long as you don't tell me how bad it is back home.
Yeah.
You know, and that kind of
Well,
kept
unfortunately, with Vietnam, we knew how bad it was back home.
Yeah.
You know, the protests and the Air Force Times, we were able to get that over there, and so we were well aware of what was going on in this country.
Yeah, it was kind of a mess, to put it lightly.
Right.
Yeah. So you're back home for a little while, and then you end up at Selfridge. So tell me about kind of that.
Well, the transition was, it's Vietnam returnees get choice of base. Being an East Coaster, I picked 6 bases up and down the East Coast, and my 7th choice was no preference. And I learned a lesson from that. Never leave anything blank, and don't say no preference, because they sent me to Selfridge, which wasn't anywhere close to the East Coast.
No, not even.
Yeah.
Not even close at all.
And to be honest with you, it was the worst assignment I had, believe it or not, even, I mean, considering I'd just come back from Vietnam, because we were the only regular Air Force on the base. So where you had the guard, the reserve, and all that, they were closing down the auto shop, they were closing down the gym. There wasn't a whole lot to do except to go off base to the bars and drink.
Yep.
And it just was not a great assignment.
Well, everybody knows where Selfridge is. There's not a lot around there anyway.
Yeah, we were able to find the local bars without a problem.
Oh, absolutely. I can't imagine that you wouldn't.
Yeah.
So what year was this that you got there?
September of 1970.
Okay.
And then I got out in May of 72.
All right. What was duty like at Selfridge then?
Well, it was good. Again, because I was a radar approach controller initially, I worked radar approach control except for 6 months to get that tower experience. And it wasn't overly busy. We had all 5 services there. So we had a Coast Guard helicopter that was out on missions. We had a lot of training, a lot of Navy S-3s. Marine Corps had, so there was a mixture of aircraft. And where it got very interesting was that there was very limited airspace south because of Detroit Metro. And because of that, it was hard when you started getting the jet aircraft in to keep them within that airspace. So you mix an S-3, which is a prop, with a jet, and it doesn't work out well.
No, I got to think it was every day was different.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you think that was good though, that you got that mix?
Yeah, and I did get a chance to learn the area, and as we get further into this, I was at Detroit Metro at one point in time, so I had a lot of familiarity with the area when I finally got to Detroit Metro.
Okay, so you finish out your time at Selfridge. It's time your enlistment's up, and it's time to move on. What happens?
Well, I met my future wife while I was at Selfridge.
Okay.
In June, I got out in May. In June, we got married. We went back to New York, and we got married in my parents' house. And she had a son from a previous marriage. So I was unemployed and now had a family.
Yeah, instantly.
Yeah. So I ended up working for a company in Mount Clemens, which did urethane work and stuff like that. And within a year, I'd worked my way up to supervisor. It wasn't the greatest paying job, but it was better than no paying job at all.
Right.
It put food on the table. And I took the FAA test, and I believe it was because of a Vietnam veteran, you get 5 extra points along with whatever your test score was, and I had 105 points, so I was pretty sure that I was going to get into the FAA. It was just a matter of when, because they had a freeze on.
Right.
So, but I do remember that it took me about a year to finally get hired by the FAA, and I got pretty upset. I'd watched the TV, and the government was putting out, "Don't forget, hire a vet," and I felt like doing a drop kick on the TV, because our own government's sitting there saying, "Hire the veterans," but we're not going to hire you because we've got a freeze on.
Right.
And so
Right.
it was a time where you felt like you'd served your country, and now your own government wasn't helping you get into the career field that you wanted to get into.
Right. That was a rough time anyway, economically. Like we were kind of rolling into that recession and
Yeah, that was
gas.
72.
Yeah, gas and all that stuff was on the horizon. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So I believe I hired in May of 73.
Okay. All right. And so how does that work? You hire in the FAA. I'm sure they don't just throw you in a control tower, right?
Well, actually, they do. I had to go, even though I had 4 years of experience as a controller, they still send you down to Oklahoma City, which is where their academy is at.
Uh-huh.
And my recollection was it was like a 4-week course. You take the weather courses, which is there's nothing wrong with refreshers on some of these courses.
Yeah.
So my first, I was hired in the Detroit City Airport. And that was quite an eye-opener. I probably, to be honest with you, worked harder at Detroit City than I did at any other facility. We used to call it shaking the Cessna tree. On a Saturday morning, every Cessna on the airport had come out. They all wanted to be in the pattern. And I can remember as a controller, when you were working local control, which is controlling an aircraft in the air, is that you keyed the mic and hardly ever unkeyed it.
Wow.
Turn your base, cleared the land, this and that, such and such, follow this guy. And it was an eye opener.
Did you like on a busy day like that? Did you find like when you went home it was hard to turn that off? Like I would still, like I used to be a dispatcher, and I would still hear like dispatching things while I was trying to sleep.
Well, it wasn't only there; it was pretty much my whole time in the FAA, and I spent 8 years in the FAA.
Uh-huh.
If you had a day that was a bad day, you'd go home and you'd hash it through your mind. If something didn't go quite right, you'd do the whole thing all over again, just like you were there.
Right.
And there were many times where you really didn't get any sleep doing that.
No.
And it was at times could be a problem, especially when you had to go back in and work the next day and you weren't getting the sleep you hoped to be getting.
Yeah, I could see where that might wear on you after a while.
Yeah.
So how long were you at Detroit City Airport?
I was at City until 1975.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, the game in the FAA, if you want to call it a game, was that you go through various stages of different airports. So Akron-Canton was a level 2 radar approach control. So I went to Akron-Canton. I was there until 79, moved on to Columbus, in Columbus, Ohio, Port Columbus, and was there for about a year. And then from there, I bid on Detroit Metro and was at Detroit Metro.
Okay. Did you like Detroit Metro? Was that?
Well, my wife liked it.
Yeah.
She was from this area. And
I guess that's hopeful.
yeah, and I can remember when I first told her we were going down to Akron-Canton, she said, well, I don't want to go down there. They've got an accent. They don't have any more accent than we do.
It's such a big country. That's funny, though, because people have accents everywhere you go.
Yeah. So, and then when I told my wife when I was at Columbus that I was going to bid on Metro, she said, let's go.
Yeah.
However, she did tell me when we got to Metro that the next time you want to move, you're moving by yourself.
Oh.
Yeah, well, I moved the family, 4 times, and
Yeah.
it's hard on the kids.
Well, it's almost like being in the military, really.
Yeah, right. And so in an 8-year period, we went from Detroit City to Akron-Canton to Columbus to Detroit Metro. And so you got kids that are in school and they've made friends, and fortunately my youngest son made friends very easily, so he wasn't greatly affected by it. And then by the time we got to Detroit Metro was when my younger kids were starting to get into school.
And how many kids did you have?
3.
Okay. All right. And pretty evenly spaced out then, or?
No, my oldest was born in '66. Again, I adopted him.
Oh, that's right.
And then my 2 other children were 2 years apart, 73 and 75.
Oh, okay. All right. So they didn't hang out with their older sibling then too
Not
too
so
much.
much.
Yeah, just each other.
Right.
Okay. All right. So you do that for 8 years then, and now you can't go anyplace else. So what'd you do?
Well, the next plan would have been to get into supervision, maybe start it back at a tower like City, and then move to another place, and eventually get to a place like Detroit Metro again as a supervisor.
Okay.
It's pretty rare to go from a controller to a supervisor, but it has happened. So it's a constant move the family game, and my wife just had more than enough of that.
Right.
So as it turned out, it ended up not being a problem, because in 1981, when we went on strike, Ronald Reagan, while he was a candidate, said that he was going to reduce our hours to more commensurate with the job from 40. The Canadian controllers were working 32 and never worked traffic like we did.
Right.
And what we didn't realize is that he meant from 40 to 0.
Because he fired everybody, didn't he? Yeah.
About 14,000. And I believe today they're still in effect.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about it, in 1981, they had to replace us all. So you had a big influx of new controllers. So the retirement is 20 years at age 55, 25 years at any age. So roughly 25 years later, it's like having a strike, except it's not a strike. Now they're all retiring.
Right.
So today they're 3,000 controllers short. And it's a very small percentage of people that come out of school, go to a facility, and actually end up being an air traffic controller. So if you were to put 100 controllers through school, maybe 20 of them would end up being full performance level controllers when it was all over said and done.
Mm-hmm.
We'd have guys that would come from Lansing or Flint to Metro and just couldn't cut it and would end up going back.
Very high stress environment, right?
No, not according to the FAA. The FAA said it was no more stressful being an air traffic controller than driving down the highway, and our civilian equivalent was a veterinarian assistant.
Wow.
And people wonder why we went on strike.
Yeah. Well, what was that like for you? You had this job, and then all of a sudden you just don't, like, you're done.
Well, it's kind of interesting. First of all, I was vice president of the union down there, and eventually the president before we were decertified. and none of us would have ever thought that they would fire 14,000 out of 15,000 air traffic controllers.
Right.
I mean, who would have thought that for a second? And Reagan got some bad advice. He pretty much was told that, if you give them this 48-hour ultimatum, most of them will run back and the hardliners will stay out. You'll get rid of the hardliners and we'll be in great shape. And that didn't happen.
Yeah.
And we got really beat up on a contract. At that time, we were asking for a $10,000 raise. And I would go to UAW meetings, and UAW members say, "You guys have got a lot of nerve asking for $10,000. And I would say to them, "Wait a minute. If you're expecting to get 2,000, you don't start at 2,000. You start at 10 and you negotiate."
Right.
We wanted to have an Olympic-sized swimming pool on every control tower, but we were willing to give that up.
We'll take a water fountain instead, right?
So, we got, we had no support from the unions. The Teamsters crossed our picket lines, and the UAW was good. They gave us a hall to meet at constantly, but the pilots didn't support us.
Mm-hmm.
The mechanics, the various other unions just simply, we got no support. And a lot of people today will say that the beginning of the downfall of the unions was when what happened to the air traffic controllers, when these companies started seeing what Reagan did. And it's the same with the Detroit News, where they fired all of their people. These companies started deciding that that's what they were going to do. They were taking Reagan's example and they were going to utilize it.
Mm-hmm.
And the unions have never had the strength that they had prior to the PATCO strike.
Yeah. My dad was a union guy. He worked for General Motors from like 65 to I think 1990. But yeah, you can see it.
Yeah.
There was like an arc where it was very powerful and then it just wasn't.
Right.
Yeah. So what did you do after this?
Well, I got into real estate,
Mm-hmm.
which I hated. The guy gave me, the broker gave me a cubicle and a telephone. I worked 7 days a week. He was giving me half the commission. So I made $40,000 a year and gave him $40,000 for a cubicle and a telephone. And that wasn't my thing, but it was, again, you got to put food on the table, so that's what you do.
Right.
In the process of doing real estate, I found that when I had a transaction, that it was important to try and get the people that were buying, if I had the buyers, the best interest rate that they could get, which meant a better chance of them qualifying, which meant a better chance of it closing, which meant a better chance that I was going to make a commission on it. But you sat on the phone constantly having to call the banks and all that. So I actually started a company that gathered interest rates from the various mortgage companies, and I published it and sold it to real estate offices. And I did that for 32 years. And it went from where I just the various real estate office got my report to the newspapers picked it up. So all the newspapers would publish it on a weekly basis. And it grew from there. I was reporting on 90 lenders and had probably 10 more that were waiting to get in because the papers didn't have the room to add any more than that.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
What a great story. Like, I hate this job, but there's this part over here I think I can do.
And the part I missed was I also got into CAD/CAM, computer-aided manufacturing, computer-aided design. So I did that, and then I did my mortgage thing on the side.
Oh.
Because I only had to do that one day a week.
Right.
So I built that business while I was actually doing CAD/CAM. So I started out, I think, at $6.25 an hour, which was not a lot of money, and went to another company. They gave me a quarter raise after a year, and so I went to another place and got a $4 raise, ended up being a supervisor, and then that company started a software company to develop a computer, PC-based CAD/CAM product. And I was the technical support manager for that company until I left.
Really?
Yeah.
So that's interesting because I used CAD. I worked in the utility industry for 28 years, so I probably used some of the products that
Computer
you developed.
vision, SimLink.
Yeah. We used
two that I worked on. Besides, we had one called Solution 3000, which was a PC-based one. So I was key in the development of that because I had all the knowledge and background, you know, for what these high-end systems could do that we were trying to develop into this PC-based system. So I left the company. They had promised me a percentage of the company, and it was a husband and wife, a family business. The wife hated computers. She had said to me more than often, I don't know why anybody would like computers. So I would go out to customer sites to do technical support, and I might have the part to keep their CAD/CAM system running. And these companies are making money when their CAD systems are running. They're not making money when they're not.
Right.
And so I would have possibly, for example, a math processor. Or I knew what the problem was, and I'd go out there to change it, and she would tell me that I had to come all the way back to Novi from Sterling Heights to get an invoice, you know, for a $300 part. And I said, I'll handwrite an invoice. So they felt that was disrespectful. So pretty soon I was on the out.
Wow.
So I started a computer sales and service, utilizing all of their customers. I didn't take their customer database. I knew who they were because I was out there all the time.
Right.
Because they were threatening to sue me for taking their customer database. And I said, I finally said to them, either sue me or get off my back.
Yeah.
You know, because I didn't take any written customer database. I visit every one of them.
And these are people who knew and trusted you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I ended up doing computer sales and service, where the problem eventually came in was at the time, you know, they depended on me, and then companies like CompUSA came in, and I couldn't compete.
Right.
Because they're selling 100 computers, I'm selling 1 or 2 a month. And I would write post processors. If they had a computer go out or a monitor go out, I would bring another one out. I would keep them running. So I said to them, either you consider my services value added or you don't, because CompUSA is not going to write you a post processor, and they're going to take your computer, and who knows when you're going to get it back. And eventually, in 1995, I finally shut that down because I just, you know, the people were more interested in saving a few bucks than they were with the service.
Right. Sort of what's going on with like online ordering versus going to a brick and mortar store.
So,
right?
but by the time that happened, my mortgage reporting service was going extremely well. So I was working one day a week out of my house and making really good money. So
yeah,
I had a whole lot of people say to me, I wish I knew what your formula was.
Well, what is it about you? Because you seem to have like a knack for like seeing this need, and then, I mean, because, I mean, I don't see the connection between CAD CAM and mortgage interest rates and air traffic control. Like, you just have all these different things that you've done just out of seeing a need and then figuring out how to fill
And
it.
that's
So,
precisely it, seeing a need.
uh-huh.
I was their head technical support guy. When I left, I knew they were going to be in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I would go out and I would solve problems that their people couldn't solve. So it was kind of a love-hate relationship. You know, they loved it when I was out there solving their problem.
Right.
So, and that was, you know, I mean, I had a relationship with some of the software people and stuff like that. And I had one guy that was talking about leaving because of what they'd done to me, and I said, no, don't do that. And as a matter of fact, they finally said to him that if we find out you're hanging around with Steve, we're going to let you go. So, I mean,
Wow.
that's how vindictive they were.
Yeah. Well, people get protective, or they get paranoid, or I don't know what the word is, but yes.
So let's back up for a second
Yeah,
and
please.
talk about the strike. Something that a lot of people don't know about is that the Reagan administration was dead set on making sure that we never made a living again, if at all possible. We had guys that tried to get into the Canadian air traffic control system, and our government put pressure on the Canadians not to hire any of us. We had guys that went into owner-operator trucking, and the companies were threatened with pulling all of their government contracts if they hired any of their controllers. They did any and everything that they possibly could. We were dragged into court. I had, on the next day of the strike, I had federal agents around my house trying to find me. I was down at the Union Hall.
Right.
But we had people that were taken away and chains and shackles, presidents of locals. So the government was not happy with us.
I had never heard that. They it basically was scorched earth with you guys.
Yes, yeah.
Wow.
They were very vindictive. I worked with, they developed a team. One of the guys was the president of Coleman Industries out of Kansas. Another was a University of Michigan professor. And there was one other GM vice president. And they were charged by the government to go around and visit all the towers, talk to the controllers who stayed in, and make recommendations to the FAA. So I contacted this professor out of the University of Michigan, and I said, who are you going to be speaking to? And he said, well, the controllers that are still in there. I said, you're never going to get a true picture if you don't talk to the controllers that are on the outside, that went on strike. So he went to the FAA and he said to them, can I talk to these controllers? And they said yes. And I set him up throughout the country to go to union meetings and sit down and talk with the controllers. And we actually, I and another controller wrote a book that was never published. And the reason is that it was fiction based on fact. So what we would do is we would take sections of this report they made to show that what we were saying was what was actually happening. And no publisher would take it. You either it's fiction or it's fact, and we won't take the two combined.
Right, right. Now you have historical fiction that people write all the time.
Yeah. So
That might be worth self-publishing.
Yeah. Well, nobody's anymore. It's probably. The funny thing is, the title was the midair collision of the FAA and PATCO.
Oh.
Was the title of it.
Yeah, probably no one would even know, right, anymore. It was.
So, but it was pretty bad. You know, they were pressing real hard to make sure that you couldn't feed your family or get a job or anything that was related to air traffic control.
So that's really kind of what pushed you into real estate then? Because what else are you going to do?
Well, I was eventually, Bill Clinton lifted the ban. What happened was the federal government, when you're released like that, you can go to the Merit Systems Protection Board, which we did, and all of us lost. So then we filed with the circuit court, and they held it for 5 years until Reagan appointed all justices for the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. And we had attorneys, and we never got our day in court. The DC Circuit Court of Appeals took 5 cases, decided against him, and then said, yours is kind of like his, yours is kind of like his, you lose, you lose, you lose.
Wow.
So this justice for all and you get your day in court isn't necessarily how it really goes.
Right, right. You know what? Something interesting, though, I got to say, is that you're passionate about it, but you don't seem bitter about it.
No, and and I'll tell you exactly why, because you and I wouldn't be talking today if I had stayed in that job with the stress.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the simple fact is that in the long run, Reagan did me a favor, because I wouldn't be here today. And I'm at least as successful, if not more so, than if I'd have stayed in the FAA. I could have retired when I was 49 years old, because I would have had the 25 years that I needed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had to work longer, but I'm not afraid of work. I've started these companies and stuff like that, and here I am. I'm now going in my 7th year as a commander of a VFW and senior vice commander of the American Legion. So my thing is not to sit at home. I do my own brake jobs, my own oil changes. And my philosophy is, why would I pay somebody to do something that I'm capable of doing myself?
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. So I don't want to get ahead of ourselves then. So you, I had a question. Hold on a second. It was a good one too, doggone it. Yeah, so the question is, like, overall, philosophically speaking, do you think like all these things happen for a reason then?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just
curious.
I mean, like I said, I was very conscientious. All of my ratings in the FAA were excellent. I had what was called QWIs, which are quality within grade. So, for example, when I was a GS 12 and I went to a GS 13, I went to a 14 because I got a quality within grade. So my work was superior in most people's opinion. And I just knew that I can handle the hardships. That, it's the same thing. You get out of the military, and you're not getting hired by the FAA. You got to do something.
Right.
So I mean, I was offered a percentage of a urethane company to stay with them, but there was no way in the world that was ever going to happen.
Yeah, you sound like you know what you don't want, right?
Right.
Absolutely. So you, I'm just fascinated by all these things that you've done, but I want to talk about. When did you become involved in these veteran service organizations, the VFW and the American Legion?
Well, I joined a group downtown Brighton called the Brighton Veterans Memorial Committee, and they have a memorial down there. And I was just a volunteer. I helped them put pavers in and things that need to be done at the memorial. And eventually got on the committee, and then eventually became chairman of the committee, which I am today. And we were having difficulty when we had the parade downtown. The communications between the committee and the parade organizers, which were the VFW and the American Legion, weren't communicating. So the American Legion and the VFW would set up the parade, but they didn't do anything after. So what we would do is we would do stuff after at the memorial. We would have speakers and all of that kind of stuff. So I joined solely to be the liaison between the Brighton Veterans Memorial Committee and the VFW and the American Legion. So that's how it started. And within a year, I was senior vice commander of the American Legion, and a year later, I was commander of the VFW. And I have a lot of knowledge, especially in computers. I do all of the POS front end, back end, I'm sorry, plus I can do the front end. Here I do most of all of the computer work. I do accounting. I do the accounting for the 4 different organizations, because I did my own accounting when I had my mortgage reporting service and my computer company. So I have all of these different backgrounds that people need. And I can remember I was sitting in here and somebody was complaining about this electronic sign out front, that nobody knew how to do it. And I said, well, I've got a computer background. I could look at it. And I no sooner said that, and they had the control sitting on the table saying, here you go.
Make it work.
Yeah. Which I did and still do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just, I've got a lot of knowledge in a lot of different areas, which seem to be useful to both the organizations here, and it served me well with my own organizations.
Well, and it sounds too like even in your private businesses, they're really service organizations as well. I mean, providing that information on mortgage interest rates, that's a
Right.
service, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you get paid for it. That's great, but that's a service. Helping people out with their computers, that's a service.
Right. Well, I considered myself a statistician for the mortgage rates. I used to deal with a gentleman named Murray Feldman who did a Sunday show here on Channel 2, and I would go in and do interviews with him, and at some point in his opinion to become a mortgage expert, people would say, well, why would you take an ARM versus a 15-year? Why would you take a 15 versus a 30 and all that?
Yeah.
And I would go on his show and do that. I, like I say, I just when I get into something, I'm usually pretty thorough.
You want to know all about it, right? Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I can remember when I was a kid, I got my first bike, and I remember my parents went on vacation to Colorado, and then we were in Kansas, and I took a hammer and a nail, and I made a flat tire on my bike because my dad had shown me how to fix a flat tire, so I had to try it myself. And I would take lawnmower engines and tear them apart. And, in those days too, I would go down to a hardware store locally where they rebuilt and did that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I was very lucky because the guy who did that was more than happy to have me in there and be my mentor and show me what he was doing. And I think that that's what helps kids grow, is people who can take their knowledge and pass it on to kids and get them interested in something if they show an interest in what you're doing.
Right. Sometimes it's a matter of just listening to the kid, right?
Yeah.
It's funny that you say all that because when I was a kid, my mom she would go to yard sales and she would buy me like blenders and toasters and things so I could take them apart and see how they worked and then put them back together.
Uh-huh.
So very, very similar. I didn't go quite as far entrepreneurially as you have, but yeah.
Well, I've got a ZTR, and it's got 2 drives on it, and I was having a problem with one, so I bought this kit. I said, well, first of all, they weren't going to be able to give it back to me for a month, and I couldn't go without it for a month.
Right.
So it ended up being a blown head gasket on it. So I put a gasket on it, and the thing worked fine for years thereafter. So I'm just not afraid to jump in and see what I can do. There's a couple of things I won't do. I don't do gas appliances. I won't put my own water heater in because I don't want to blow the house up.
Right.
And I do limited electric. I'm not crazy on it, but I guess I know what my limits are, and when it's time to call a professional in.
Yeah. Well, that's part of life, right? Figuring out what your limits are.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to go beyond them to figure out what they are, but
Right.
yeah, we all get there. Well, it's we've talked about a lot of things, and covered I mean, this is just fascinating, to be honest. Like, I've talked to a lot of people. I talked to a guy who got out of the military and invented the machine that wraps bowling pins in that plastic that they're wrapped in. But this, it's interesting that military people tend to have kind of that spirit of, if there's a problem, we'll figure out how to fix it.
Well, and one thing and you know it as well as I do, that military teaches a discipline. And the example I always use is my wife's up at my summer home for 6 months. So who cares if I make the bed? Nobody comes in the house. I make the bed religiously every morning, and it's discipline.
Right.
Yeah. So it's, in other words,
Yeah.
you do what you have to do, and you do it.
Well, and if you make your bed every morning, you've started your day doing something.
Yes.
You've accomplished something already.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but I'm a firm believer in that every kid should be in the military and learn discipline. It would serve them well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we would be a lot further ahead, maybe.
Right.
So, as we kind of wrap up our conversation, I want to make sure we've covered everything that you want to talk about. So is there anything we haven't talked about that you wanted to cover before we...
No, other than I'm very involved in all of the organizations here. Again, I'm commander of the VFW going on my 7th year. I've just relinquished. The reality is I'm not getting any younger.
Right.
So I'm trying to push off some of these jobs onto somebody else, because if something were to happen to me and I'm doing all of these different functions, it could become a problem. So I'm the hardest thing I'm having is finding somebody that's very computer literate, where I could train them on the back end of the POS system and kind of that kind of stuff. I kind of joke sometimes when there's people here, they'll say to me, somebody will say, well, this is the commander, and I'll say, and the head janitor also. So
Right.
I pretty much, I hire the bartenders, I go up on the roof and put the filters in, I set up the hall for functions when they need help. And so I pretty much, I do whatever's called for here.
Yeah, you do what's got to be done.
Yeah.
Well, good. So, I just have one more question for you then as we wind down, and that is, someone listening to this maybe 100 years from now, what message would you want to leave for people as we end our conversation today?
I guess that it would be, if you feel that you're good at something, you should pursue it. And if it means starting your own business, the advice I would give, though, is that when you first start a business, it takes time for it to grow. If you have a partner who can help pay the bills, and a prime example would be my son. He started a little restaurant, and he felt pressured to his wife was an engineer, she was making good money, but he felt pressure to start taking money out of the business when he probably shouldn't have. He should have left it in there to build it, and the business failed. And so if you're gonna go out on your own, you've got to have a plan, and you've got to stick to it. And if your plan is that within 6 months of starting your business, you expect to be paying your mortgage and your bills, then you probably shouldn't do it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. Thanks for being the first out of this VFW post to record your story. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate what you're doing here, and I think that it's a great service for veterans.
Thank you for watching Veterans Archives. We hope you enjoyed this veteran story. Please be sure to hit that subscribe button, like and share our videos, as well as checking us out on social media. We're on Facebook and TikTok, LinkedIn, X, and Instagram. Be sure to check out those pages, share, and like. And for more information about what we do, go to www.veteransarchives.org.